Let's take a quick look at what question 3 looks like. You now need to think about the whole of the source. Now that's going to be important. You need to look at the source in sections and make sure that you write about the beginning, middle and the end. The text is from there and they'll tell you where it's from, the beginning or middle or opening chapter, whatever it is. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? Now I've highlighted that bit because students are getting much better at thinking about what the structure is, but they're much less good at thinking, well, so what? Why does that structure affect how the reader thinks? So I'm going to spend quite a while teaching you how to get those marks. Then you get these bullet points. You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source. So that's a really strong steer. Always write about the beginning. Ignore the word could. It means must. Okay? How and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops. So you need some words about why, which comes back to interesting you as a reader. And you also need to think of the source as developing. So when you're writing about the structure, you need to say why one piece of structure relates back to an earlier piece or forward to a later piece. And I'll show you how to do that. And then the final bullet point basically says write about anything else that you like as long as it is structure. And of course, this is their way of saying you must write about the ending. But we're not going to tell you to write about the ending, because if we did that, then everyone would do it and everyone would get similar marks. So that third bullet point actually means, for God's sake, write about the ending of the text. Okay, so how do we write about the structure? Well, what we've noticed in the November 2017 exam and also the June one, I'll just get rid of that, and also in the 2018 exam, so all 3 exams so far, what the examiners have done is they have tried to pick a text with a cyclical structure. In other words, the ending of the bit that they've given you refers back to the beginning. Well, why have they done that? It's because of that third bullet point, which really means always write about the ending. So the examiners have to give you something interesting at the end to write about. And it's not just interesting, it has to be interesting in a structural way. And the easiest way to do that is to pick an ending that refers back to something at the beginning. So my prediction is this will always happen and you should always look for something cyclical. Okay. I'm also going to ask you to leave a space at the beginning of your answer. So when you've written it, you're going to have discovered what the structure is. It's really hard to work out what you want to say about the structure in advance. And this is why tactically it's really good to leave a spot at the beginning of your writing. And then once you've finished it, you can go back and then say, right, the writer begins and ends the text by focusing on blah, blah, blah. The final paragraph echoes the first, blah, blah, blah. But the difference now is blah, blah, blah. So I will show you that in the model answer I'm going to give you in a minute. The next bit of advice is to think about structural shifts, and they will always be these 3 things. They'll either be a shift in place, or a shift in character, or a shift in time. And you can guarantee those will come up because those are the only shifts that authors really use. Even if it's a shift in perspective, that's actually just a shift in character. So those 3 things will always get you the marks. And then if you want to make sure you get that second part of the question, you need to talk about how the reader understands something. Yet remember, that's the second part of the question that I highlighted for you in yellow here. That's when you're showing the examiner that you are thinking about how it's interesting the reader. And the final bit of advice is that there are 3 features which will always appear, and I've checked this by looking at the November 2017 exam and the 2018 exam, and in the first video that I did about the June 2017 exam, these things appear: contrast and foreshadowing, which is pretty much well, it's not actually the same thing, but anyway, I'll talk about those, and the cyclical structure, which I've already mentioned. Okay, so I'm imagining a text in the exam which is the story of the Three Little Pigs, and you're not given the whole story, okay, but you're just given the beginning and the middle of it. So this is the part that I'm talking about that you should leave a space for at the beginning, because I don't know what I'm going to write there. I'm going to leave that for now, okay? So this is in the exam. I start writing here with "it begins." So it begins with the exposition of the three brother pigs. We can visualize them in their mother's house, safe as a womb, and also in the fields, fenced in and safe. So we can see that they are unprepared for danger. So you should have spotted that I'm using quotations, short ones, but I'm not explaining how to interpret them. I'm just saying why they're there as a form of structure, and it's so we can see that they're unprepared. Yeah, that's the expectation that the author is building up at the beginning. So obviously we know if they're unprepared for danger, something dangerous is going to happen. The focus then shifts to contrast with the unsafe houses each pig builds when leaving home and the obvious mistakes they make. Right, it's worth pointing out at this stage that I chose my wording here by looking at the mark scheme to 2018. So I'm writing in exactly the same detail as the examiner did, with exactly the same number of quotations and pretty much exactly the same sentence lengths. So your sentences need to look like this in order to get the top marks. Now let's look at it again with my highlighting of structural words. So these are words that I'm using to show the examiner I'm writing about structure. It begins. Exposition. If you don't know that word, it means when you're giving the background. Yeah, so usually you get some background detail. That's the exposition. We can visualize them. So that's the structure is there to make us visualize something so we can see. Now hopefully you've noticed the repetition of we here. That's where I'm showing the examiner I'm writing about how it interests the reader. And I don't use the word interesting, okay, because that's not really what the author is ever trying to do. It's trying to make us see things in particular ways. Yeah, and that's why I've used the word see and the word visualize. The focus then shifts, that's my structural thing again, to contrast. And I've put that in green because you need to remember that contrast will always, 100% guaranteed, contrast will always appear in any exam text they give you for this question. And I know that because that's what writers do. Every writer I've ever read structures their writing around contrast. Guaranteed to come up. Okay, let's look now at the rest of my answer. This is shown structurally by repeating the description of each house using the same pattern of words. First, we learn that the first pig has built a house of straw because he is lazy and has not thought about the long-term consequences and safety. His house is blown down by the big bad wolf. Then we learn the second pig builds his house of wood, followed by his sense of superiority for being smarter than his lazy, fat-brained brother. His house, too, is blown down by the big bad wolf. Finally, we meet the third pig, who has built his house to be safer than home, returning us to the lesson he learned from his mother at the beginning, but which his brothers did not. This foreshadows the ending, where we suspect his house will not be blown down by the big bad wolf. Okay, again to remind you, my sentence lengths, my paragraph lengths are exactly the same as the examiner's answer in 2018, with the same number of quotations and also the same kind of shortness of quotation, zooming in on particular language. And finally, about the quotation, I'm not interpreting them, I'm just linking these quotations to the structure. Right, let's have a look now at what I need to highlight for you. So again, the structural words that tell the examiner I'm commenting on the structure. This is shown structurally, repeating, pattern. First we learn, then we learn, finally we meet. They're all structure words. Again, you will notice this phrase, we learn, we meet, to show that I'm explaining how it's trying to interest the reader. Returning us, interest the reader again. And then this foreshadows. Now, you remember I told you that contrast and foreshadowing will nearly always turn up. So I've put foreshadows here, and it's foreshadowing something that's going to happen later. That's what foreshadowing does. And then the other thing was the cyclical structure. Now, I haven't managed to fit the word cyclical in, but when I use the word returning, that means like a cycle, like a circle. Okay, so using the word returning tells the examiner I've spotted that it is a cyclical piece. And I always want to do that in the final paragraph, because that's when I'm writing about the ending, and the ending is always going to refer back some way to the beginning. Okay, so that phrase is always going to be useful to me 100% of the time that I try this question. And so the final things we need to consider is how students lose marks in this question. Well, I showed you at the beginning that they'll often forget to write about the whole of the source, so they won't necessarily include the ending, or they won't include the beginning, or they'll miss the middle. You know, you've got to cover all three sections. The other thing that students often do is they just say, well, there was a change of focus here, and there's a change of focus there, and there's a change of focus here, and another change of focus there. Boom, job done. No, you can't just show the change. You have to do the next bit, which is explain why the change of focus or emphasis happens. And the reason why is always here, how it affects our thoughts of the character or the future. And the way I've done that for you, really simply, I hope you remember, is by using the word we and us all the way through. And the thoughts of the future, I've used phrases like we suspect and foreshadows. There it is, this foreshadows and we suspect. So now you are fully armed for this question. Don't forget to look out for my next videos on how to get 100% in the other questions. Good luck with your revision and goodbye.